Lucy is our main protagonist, and she's got all the accolades, as well as being someone who loves life in the vault. Much like everyone in Vault 33, they do activities together, are a cohesive whole, and even teach each other about the history of life before the bombs dropped, all for the betterment of the human race, to prepare themselves for Reclamation Day, the day the Vault Dwellers emerge to rebuild America from the devastation of the nuclear fallout. So when that life gets turned upside down, when her vault gets raided and the people she loves are killed, she has to make a choice. Either sit around and leave her dad to perish in the chaos of the wasteland, or go after him, avenging those who died, all while braving the elements as she comes into contact with people from the surface. But the realization that the reclamation started without them impacts her greatly. Whilst at first she is obviously out of her comfort zone and is ill-equipped for the task at hand, those very trials harden her into making some difficult choices, all while trying to maintain that positivity that surrounded her life in the vaults. And so when met with the truth about her father, that he isn't the kind, nurturing man she'd always known, her world is upended once again. She is presented with a dilemma, one that she pushes through thanks to her time becoming accustomed to how life is lived out here. Something that is encapsulated by her repetition yet differing inflection of the phrase okie dokie. Once Lucy reaches the end of season 1, she's a different person. A person willing to make the hard choices for the sake of survival, instead of hiding behind the shield of naivety and safety. A sweet, bubbly, positive person, hardened by a cruel and unforgiving world. That's what I'm assuming the writers were going for, but what I've outlined bears no weight on the quality of the execution. An idea isn't good enough on its own, much like how the Fallout show being a satire is not good enough on its own. You actually have to do something clever with the idea, moulding it into the narrative alongside every other piece in order to craft a compelling story. You can't just hide behind the shield of it being a satire whenever a criticism is levied at the writing, because satire doesn't mean good.
You want one? That make you feel so good? You want to make my cock explode now?
Lucy goes from not even considering murder as an option, to not wanting to kill, despite it being the better option and realising it's the choice she ought to make, to shooting her ghoulish mother with a look of deliberation on her face, tied with the okie dokie that's become progressively more sombre as the season has progressed. We have the makings of an arc, or at least that's what the writers want you to think. But we can't have this character journey if at the first hurdle she is willing to kill a raider, something that should clue her into not trusting anyone from the surface, or at the very least put that doubt in her mind. The arc is hindered by making her do something she's clearly against in every other interaction. Saying that being in the wasteland would mean she'd act differently isn't a reason, because the logic she'd used to kill the people whilst in the vault should apply regardless of where she is. She is obviously willing to kill someone if the situation demands it, unless of course the plot demands otherwise. Then she'll arbitrarily switch principles. If you want your character to leave the vault, don't have it be for reasons that should make her confront things that will harm the point of going to the surface in the first place. And if this is the moment that triggers her reluctance to harm anyone going forward, then this isn't clear. As I understand it, the common interpretation is that Lucy's naivety and kindness should prevent her from committing this action at all. Death, despite not being new to her, would still be a difficult thing to wrestle with for a character like this in particular, except it's never mentioned again. She was in a fight to the death on the night of her wedding, and it doesn't wreak havoc on her mental health. Perhaps it's the tone, or perhaps the writers don't understand that the ordinary person wouldn't be okay after being forced to kill someone. Apparently, Lucy is the only one to scan the raiders with her Pip-Boy. How is it that after hours of spending time together, no one decided to randomly scan any of them? It's not even that unreasonable to have someone scan them after learning about the blight on the wheat that Moldava used as their cover story. Norm doesn't trust them, and yet he's not telling anyone or scanning them for radiation. But as soon as Lucy hears something is wrong, she goes straight to the Pip-Boy to investigate. So why doesn't Norm? He's even allowed to just wander into Vault 32 to see the carnage that's gone on in there, even though this would surely be something the raiders would want to prevent. Otherwise, their whole plan falls apart. Is Hank or anybody else from Vault 33 not suspicious that they don't recognise any of these people? The vaults meet once every 3 years, and yet nobody thinks anything is wrong. Hank is even specifically chosen to be an overseer thanks to being a part of Bud's management scheme. So why is it that when he meets the overseer of Vault 32, he doesn't realise that this is not someone he ought to know as a manager, but is instead Moldava? His wife was friends with her. She must have at the very least told Hank about who she is. Hank should even have met her before the bombs dropped. It's even made clear that Hank has some idea of who she is, but only manages to remember once everyone's been killed.
I think I know who you are.
Everyone knows who I am.
Surprisingly enough, Hank isn't the only one with selective memory. As a child, Lucy was taken by her mother to Shady Sands, where she met Moldava. Had Lucy remembered this very important event in her early life, then as soon as Moldava shows her face, the whole season can't happen. Moldava knows who Hank and Lucy are, and yet she still sanctions the clumsy attack on the vault. With how the raiders carry out this plan, the plot armor to keep Lucy from being one of the random people to die is infecting the writing. There would be a vested interest from Moldava to keep Lucy alive, and to make sure Hank isn't harmed too, because if either of them are killed in the chaos, then her plan has failed or her character is at risk of assassination. The whole point of doing the charade, pretending they're from 32, is made redundant if the contrivances didn't allow for the main characters to survive. I'm guessing there was no order given to make sure people were brought to her alive, because all we see of her during the attack is one shot where she's walking somewhere with other raiders. They don't even need to kill anyone to accomplish their plan. What's stopping her from just playing the marriage game until she's able to get Hank alone, where she can drug him and kidnap him for the information she needs? From what we learn of her later in the season, she doesn't seem to want to harm people unnecessarily. So what's with her antagonism during this sequence? She was friends with Lucy's mum, and yet when it comes to her daughter, she doesn't care. Until she does care. This raider should have been told not to harm Lucy, especially since he probably knows who that ghoul is in the finale. Lucy also would have seen the scars on this guy much earlier, however she didn't think something was up then. She alternatively needed loud noises in combination with the scars to do something. She might read, be mechanically savvy, be able to operate scientific equipment, teach, be a gymnast, fence, do judo, and dabble in riflery, and in her recreational time garden and even participate in a book club, but even with all of that training, should still be physically overwhelmed by an opponent like this. And to make matters worse, he's got a knife. You're telling me that this guy, someone who's lived on the surface their whole lives and probably had to fight to survive since they were physically able to, is beaten by a 5'5" woman who's not been trained in knife combat. Instead of immediately getting killed, she's thrown around and even able to get in a nut shot before being stabbed somewhere that doesn't cause instant death. Then rather than just stabbing her again, the raider grabs her by the throat and does this, giving her enough time to grab a serendipitous glass jar from the sink. The raider should see what she's doing and put a stop to it. But just when he should have the chance to, the scene is interrupted by a contrived alarm, giving Lucy the opportunity to bash him in the head with the glass. If that alarm had gone off at any other time, then she'd be dead. Instead, she's willing to kill the raider. You might be tempted to say that my claim about how this moment contradicts her arc is actually what sets her on the arc. In needing to kill this guy, she swears to herself that there is a better option. But in this situation, there wasn't a better option. The fight demanded that one of them must die, which, if this was true, would be something she'd surely carry with her when confronting people in the wasteland. Thankfully, because she's attacked in her bedroom and was only stabbed near the stomach, she's able to quickly get to a stim pack so that she doesn't bleed out. The stim pack basically negates any injury during the fight. She's then able to access the armory. You'd think the raiders would leave someone to guard it in case someone tries to mount a retaliation effort. You wouldn't want to just leave some guns lying around in case someone from the vault decides to pick one up and use it to stop you. Oh, never mind. If there was a raider in the corridor before Lucy made it to the armory, then she'd be dead. But there's just this guy stabbed into the wall. Did the raiders just forget to be clever, or are they purposely stupid? Now, if the first person she comes across has a gun instead of a knife, despite being the faction that raided the armory, then she'd be dead again. But because this guy's a moron, he decides to raise his knife after seeing Lucy's holding a gun, and gets shot for it. You'd think that in the wasteland, self-preservation is quite important.
It's just dumb!
Then Lucy gets to witness the carnage below. There's punching, stabbing, shooting, eating cake. Hold on, where are the children? Are they safe? Are they alright? Is Lucy not concerned about their well-being? They're not in any scene other than the one shot they appeared in the opening montage. So is this a massive misstep by the writers? If we explain their disappearance with an in-universe reason, then the only answer is that they were brutally murdered during the raid. But nobody seems to care about them. We don't see any of them later in the season when Vault 33 is split in half and told to inhabit Vault 32. Something so catastrophic has been forgotten that it either obliterates everyone's character or makes the writers look stupid.
You're a little slow, aren't you? Well, just keep moving and don't come back here. You'll be fine.
There's a tonal mismatch between the choice of song and the nature of the event. Coupled with the eating cake and silly guys standing around not getting attacked, it's sapping the level of engagement from what's happening to these people. Maybe the writers understood that they didn't bother characterizing any of the people who die here, so they masked it with cool-looking action, violence, and music. Or is it supposed to juxtapose the chaos? But then it's infected by Lucy's lack of reaction to what's going on. This doesn't look like a horrified person, which is odd, seeing as she has a greater reaction to other gruesome events, like when Wilzig's leg is replaced in episode 2. Seems a bit inconsistent, regarding these events are arguably more heinous and should impact her more emotionally. But maybe we're just meant to have fun and enjoy the silliness. But if we engage with the content, what are we supposed to think here? That we're not in a life or death situation, and that we're just having fun because it's a satire?
Get that jelly mold
Is this guy not more concerned not only of his own life, but of the people that somehow don't know what's going on? For some reason, that's come out in the form of worrying about the jelly. Why is that the focus?
You no got pass. You go away. You no go away, you get hurt. Understand?
If he's so stressed that his cognition has gone haywire, then why is this the thing he's managed to focus on? What would the writers say has happened here? Anyway, his inability to be precise gets these people killed. So maybe he is just stupid. Lucy then comes rushing down the stairs, and just as she's gonna get shot, plot armor kicks in so she's fine. It's a good job this raider decided to slowly raise his gun and enjoy the moment, despite all the chaos going on around him, rather than just shooting her immediately. Another raider comes charging in with a bat and misses her entirely. Then a vault dweller appears and makes the guy with the axe kill the guy with the gun. If that didn't randomly happen, then he'd probably just try shooting her again. In the mayhem, another raider that's about to cause a threat to Lucy accidentally gets shot so that Lucy can spend some time watching the projector explode. You have other priorities right now, but never mind. Rather than spending time on characterizing Lucy further, we focus on a woman with a fork in her eye angrily shooting a gun. With everything going on, apparently Chet hasn't heard any of the fighting either, even though it looks like he's in an area close by. He just reacts like this is the first he's seeing of any of this. It looks like he must have been here a while, if he's unaware of what's going on. The raider then uses an inhaler, but where's he got this from? There's going to be barely any left on the surface, and that's without considering the fact that most inhalers expire after a year, which means he must have nicked it from the vault. But why is this his priority? But that doesn't matter because he manages to get tripped up and fall in between the door as it's closing, getting chopped in half in the process.
They had me with the door.
That was lucky.
Lucy then saves her brother by putting him in a bunker, and we find out that the raider from the bedroom isn't actually dead. He looked dead, but I guess he's fine now. He seems to have walked it off. I mean, look at this. You'd be forgiven for thinking that Lucy landed that hit on his throat, but I guess it was only across his face, even though his reaction to the attack makes it look worse. Anyway, Lucy's about to die again until Hank appears from nowhere to save her. Where's he been all this time? He wasn't in the main courtyard area during the fight, which means he must have been doing something else. Maybe fighting somewhere completely different to where the fighting was, or trying to find Lucy in the chaos. But it's still incredibly lucky he came across her when he did, and it makes him look like he doesn't care for his son very much if he's only looking to save Lucy. From the two interactions Hank's had with Norm, I think that's a reasonable assumption to make.
In that respect, you could be a cannibal just like Cranston.
Norman?
He is a psychopath after all, so it's not much of a leap for him to forget about his son. Or he's not relevant to the plot just yet, so the writers forgot to have interactions where Hank is a normal dad.
That was everything the Vaults had promised.
She is lying.
He manages to hit the raider in the head twice with a spade, but he's still conscious, so he decides to drown him in a barrel of pickles. Unfortunately, there's no time for characters to react to what's just happened because it's time for plot. The Intervault door has been breached, but hold on, it was left open by the raiders when they came through for the wedding. So what's causing this alarm? The bomb they've attached to the entrance surely isn't causing it, since that's shown to be an external mechanism from the door. Moldava even has a remote control for it. I guess this is here so the main characters are where the story needs them to be. If they've stolen Chet's doodah, then this would be how the doors are meant to be opened, so it shouldn't cause the alarm to go off. But Hank arrives to find that some of the survivors have been taken hostage, and he's given the option to either save Lucy or the other vault dwellers, implying that whoever he doesn't choose will get killed. Once Hank is sedated, Moldava decides that telling Lucy she looks like her mother is a reasonable thing to say. Why wouldn't she elaborate on this? Anyway, she tells everyone to do what they do best and run and hide, even though this doesn't make sense since most of these people don't know the truth about the bombs, meaning she's also endangered innocent people, unless she believes that the descendants of the Vault-Tec managers that dropped the bombs are just to blame, but that's just silly. She then activates the bomb and tells them all to escape the blast radius. Wait, you're supposed to kill them, Moldava. That was the whole point of giving Hank the choice. You can't defend this Mercy with the reveal of her actually being a good person at the end of the season, because then she wouldn't have so ruthlessly killed the rest of them during the raid. Never mind.
That's when she realized that her husband, the overseer, was hiding things.
Get down off your high horse.
You'd think that after experiencing such a horrific event, maybe she'd act differently upon witnessing what happens in the wasteland. That being forced to watch so many people you know die, your dad be kidnapped, and your home be destroyed, something would snap. Anything would change. But that would get in the way of what journey Lucy is meant to go on, maintaining that goofy, fun exterior until the time is right. She isn't allowed to portray emotions that would get in the way of the arc she goes on. If she looked shocked, distraught, or maybe even just sad after people she's known her whole life died right in front of her, then the narrative crumbles. They let Ella Purnell act when her dad is taken away because that's what the show recognizes is important to her, but they only seem to realize this because it's hyper-relevant to the plot. So when it comes to the gruesome murders of the Vault Dwellers, the lack of a reaction seems like an oversight. Or maybe it's just a comment on her determination, but this behavior does not look like she's been shaken to her core, especially when she's not had to deal with hardship like this her entire life. Moldava is just asking for Lucy to retaliate and come find her by executing her plan this way. That's silly. If you're raiding a vault, maybe it would be best to not groundlessly kill everyone you see, and maybe don't use your real name, especially to people who, if they were to leave the vault, wouldn't have any context or leads for who she is on the surface. Otherwise, it fast tracks them to learning about her when they do go outside. If she used a false name, then Lucy wouldn't be able to gain any information from Ma, and the plot would grind to a halt. Lucy concludes that she must find her dad, and she enters the wasteland for the first time, but by this point we've already been outside the vault in this episode with Maximus, so this payoff and the focus on the reveal of what the surface looks like is undermined by the poor story structure. What also seems deficiently presented is Lucy's response to being outside the vault for the first time. Going forward, she should be in complete awe of everything she sees. She should be marvelling at the sky, something she apparently seemed invested in when the projector was destroyed earlier on. Now, Lucy has a choice to make. Go north, east, or south. I'm sure she won't arbitrarily go the exact direction she needs so the plot can happen. She could go any of these ways. It would be awkward if she turned south and then wandered that way for days without finding anything. Then none of the incredible coincidences that follow would ever occur.
Let my words touch you. Go southwest, south and west. Save our people.
After less than a day's travel, she goes to sleep but is awoken by the arrival of the guy with the dog from the start of episode 2. Lucy's lucky one of the only good people in the wasteland found her, and not one of the endless number of killers that live out here. The writers could craft a way for Lucy to justifiably meet Wilzig here, but it looks like they gave up and just had him teleport straight to her, meaning Wilzig has stumbled across the one character that is plot significant. The exit to Vault 33 and wherever Wilzig started his journey must have been really close to each other. What if these two locations were across America from one another, rather than supposedly only a few miles? It's also outrageously unlikely that the exact time Wilzig's dog gets found out, causing him to leave the facility to go find Moldava, is pretty much the same day that Moldava attacks the vault so that she can retrieve the code from Hank for what Wilzig is carrying in his neck, facilitating Lucy meeting him by accident here. Moldava's plan couldn't have been caused by what happened with Wilzig in the facility, since it would take a number of days for everyone to travel to all the places they meet. It also requires Lucy leaves the vault exactly the time she does. I guess it's possible that these events line up because it's so vague, but it means the writers didn't need to try very hard to make sure any other timeline isn't more likely to occur. As the show seems to suggest, Wilzig and Vault 33 were already quite close to each other. So why doesn't Moldava meet up with him since she's already come all this way to get Hank? Now he's got to travel the wasteland to get to Moldava's base, which ends up costing both of them. If they plan to meet up, then Wilzig would have the protection of the remaining raiders, which is what Moldava has anyway, and it can't be that difficult for them to meet up instead of being convoluted for no reason. But if everyone else was a bit smarter, then Lucy and Wilzig couldn't meet in the wasteland before meeting again in Philly, which then facilitates the conversation they have there. By having Wilzig save Lucy's life from the roaches, it creates an easy way to get them to notice each other again later on, meaning all of this is a massive contrivance. Besides, if the roaches attacked before the dog showed up to kill them for her, then she'd be dead. And if Wilzig wasn't the first to appear to tell her to not light a fire, then she'd be dead, which she then forgets by the next evening. They go their separate ways, but they both end up in Philly. Only Lucy has to bump into another random person so that she gets pushed in that direction specifically. It's becoming more frustrating knowing that her arbitrary choice to go this direction after leaving the vault is becoming increasingly important to the events playing out how the writers want it to. Lucy even made a detour whilst it was Wilzig's aim to come straight to this particular shop, and yet they still encounter each other. She even goes straight to the shop that's run by Moldava's client.
I'm actually looking for one criminal in particular.
Holy shit.
They notice each other and start chatting. They're allowed to have a whole conversation before the ghoul chimes in. It would have been awkward if he interrupted them before the audience could learn some new information, especially since he's been waiting here since before Lucy even arrived in Philly, supposedly waiting for Wilzig the whole time, and yet he doesn't get his attention for a good few minutes. Because Wilzig is a bounty, and the ghoul is here to collect that bounty, he shoots Wilzig in the leg and the fight begins. He goes through everyone until only Lucy is left, but just as she's about to get killed, Maximus flies in to imbue Lucy with more plot armor. It's a miracle the ghoul didn't shoot her immediately, not only because of how he doesn't give anyone else a chance to talk, but because of how he's also shown to have an explicit disliking towards anything to do with the vaults.
By dropping the bomb ourselves.
From Lucy's perspective, it's fine that Maximus coincidentally showed up at the moment she needed saving, but from the viewpoint of watching the events transpire, with more knowledge than the people in the universe, it shouldn't come across as a reasonable thing to happen. If well written, it should be completely believable that Maximus arrived when he did. However, we haven't seen Maximus in a while, and we only know that he'll get to Philly at some point. So even though it's not impossible he arrives to save the day, it's remarkably contrived.
Hi.
Anyway, Wilzig and Lucy escape, but Wilzig can't make it any further on his new leg, so he decides to take cyanide. But only after that, he decides to start telling Lucy vital information. Now you've only got a finite amount of time. Maybe tell her what you need to say before taking the pill?
Miss McLean.
How do you know my name?
Now he's died after saying something cryptic so that the mystery can string the audience along for the whole season. Regardless, Lucy is told to chop off his head, and we get the second okie dokie, supposedly to indicate her shift into coming to terms with what must be done in the wasteland.
Okie dokie.
Whenever Lucy's in trouble and the writers need her to be safe so that they can get certain plot beats later in the story, they pull something out of their ass to make sure she survives. She needs radiation medicine after drinking the water. She randomly finds Maximus, the only person with the exact thing she needs not to die, even though there's no reason they should encounter each other at this point. It's dumb for the same reason she survives the attack in Philly, only this time Lucy has no reason to come this way if she's tracking the head since Thaddeus ran off with it the night before, meaning instead of just going to it as the crow flies, to the best of her ability, she's following the same route.
I have a tracker that'll lead right to that head.
She gets a finger cut off and gets a new one, and it doesn't get infected. The finger getting removed would be a good moment in a development if it wasn't for what happens in the Super Duper Mart right after losing it. In isolation, it's pretty good as a representation of what will happen to you if you try to trick someone in the wasteland. And it's fitting that the ghoul chose to remove a finger after losing his, but it's undermined almost immediately. Lucy's supposed to have her organs removed by the malfunctioning robot, but she kicks the saw in such a way that it destroys her binds, giving her a fighting chance. She should also have her legs tied down if she's going to get cut open. Why do you tie someone up with the goal of restraining and not tie down 2 of their 4 limbs? It allows her to break free and find probably the best thing that can defeat it, a defibrillator. Since she's fine, she goes to find the owners of the Super Duper Mart with the working robot. So this didn't break it forever. She gets them to release the ghouls, despite there surely being a reason for the decaying people to be imprisoned. And of course, the especially evil ones attack. But instead of going for Lucy, they forget she exists and decide to exclusively attack the other people in the room. The fight happens in such a way that everyone manages to clinically kill each other, leaving Lucy as the last alive, facilitating the character moment with the Martha Ghoul.
Come on, I know there's someone in there. Talk to me.
It's a half attempt at cause and effect. The writers should realise that if she gets her finger cut off for attacking the ghoul, something she needs to learn can happen to her when in the wasteland, then that consequence ought to be sustained, or at the very least, overcome through justified adversity. The problem is that it would be thematically better had she lost the finger for good. Otherwise, the lesson she needs to learn has been reversed. Since now if she does something consequential, she'll have something happen to fix that exact dilemma. But since the writers don't seem to understand this, she gets a new finger presented to her not long after losing the first. She comes to the exact place in the wasteland where a spare finger is waiting for her, which is a byproduct of the reason the ghoul brought her here anyway. Since the writers know she can't get this new finger so easily, she gets sedated and almost harvested for organs. But because that would mean she'd be dead, she escapes that too. There is no lasting impact to her choices, something that isn't helped by the repetitive showing of her new finger in so many shots through the rest of the season. It's a case of being tossed around by the narrative until she's needed. Then we've got scenes like Thaddeus missing every shot with his gun. He empties his entire magazine into them, but they all miss. Just because it's like the game doesn't make it okay. Because if it was meant to be in line with the game mechanics, then what's the point of the line?
God, I suck without a scope.
It's definitely not to try and justify why he can't aim. He might be shit, but nobody's that shit. The writers realise that they need Lucy to get the head back ready for the finale, but with everything we know about Thaddeus and the fact that he will have a gun, it means it's going to be difficult to justify how Lucy can regain the head. So instead of doing something intelligent, they have Thaddeus miss every single bullet, from not even that far away. You could even set something up in an earlier episode to explain why Thaddeus might not have the gun or enough bullets, which would force the conversation to occur more naturally. But this way, the defense is, it's just like the luck system in the games. It's a nice get out of jail free card for the writers. They don't have to worry about consequences if they can come up with a lousy excuse or just rely on game mechanics when they're too lazy to create a better reason. The last I checked, video games and TV were different mediums. They adhere to different rules. So don't go leaning on that defense when the show needs it. This is similar to how just because it's a satire doesn't mean any stupid thing is free from criticism. What happens to your arguments whenever they do bother to try and explain events in a way consistent with storytelling rules in film? Or do those not count? The scene is made worse when Thaddeus gets shot by a booby trap, despite being made aware of their existence.
Great job on these booby traps, by the way. Really good.
This is so that he learns he's a ghoul, meaning he has to escape the Brotherhood so that he can be convinced by Maximus to give up Wilzig's head. Lucy asks for the head, and then Thaddeus immediately gets shot by an arrow to fast track the scene. It's as if the writers couldn't think of a way for them to get the head, so they create a set piece where Thaddeus is surrounded by traps so that they can have one go off when the plot needs it to. This happens so that Lucy can find herself at the observatory with Moldava and find out the truth about her father. But the Brotherhood is almost here, meaning Maximus and Lucy have to make a decision. Swap the heads and let Lucy take Wilzig to Moldava. And so before they part ways, they kiss. Up until episode 5, they had barely interacted. We'd gotten a brief conversation in Philly, but nothing in the way of developing a dynamic. Then a few more scenes where they are required to trust each other, otherwise they both die, which then undercuts the significance of the choice to trust each other, and a couple of conversations about how Lucy is naive. It's not until episode 6 that we get any real ground broken in this department, and then what we get isn't great. There's some weird dialogue that doesn't seem like it would endear them to one another. Maximus distrusts the vault, and Lucy explains that in a vault, they recognise they need each other, and she likens that to how she needed him on the surface. And that's basically it for developing their relationship. From this point onwards, we only get one more meaningful scene to help bolster this payoff. The show thinks that once they've done this and had them merely be on screen together, then that's enough. Just being physically next to each other doesn't constitute good writing when trying to justify a romantic relationship. It might be what Lucy wants from Maximus, but when creating a believable relationship, the writers have to put in a bit more effort. We have to care about them, rather than it being what the characters might want or the notion alone of them being together being what carries the investment from the viewer. So when they're leaving Vault 4 and Lucy says, "You're the best stranger I've ever met," the go-to response is that Maximus hasn't exactly got much competition. But that triggers Maximus into telling Lucy the truth about who he is.
My name isn't Titus, it's Maximus. Titus is the name of the knight who owned this suit before me. And I lied to you.
But because Lucy is such a good person, she forgives him immediately and blames it on the wasteland. Then Lucy invites Maximus to live with her in the vault after all of this is over, which makes this scene all the sadder. This has not been convincing. Lucy's naivety to everything means she trusts people regardless of who they are. Unless of course that's Maximus after he's already saved her life and the help is required to save both of them. So the development of their relationship, all the way to their eventual kiss, seems like exactly the thing that Lucy would be happy to do without realising the possible consequences or needing to justifiably develop a dynamic between them. It's a weak relationship narratively when some of the only trusting people in the entire wasteland manage to come together by sheer coincidence. The plot has forced them together without putting in the work, and that's now the main reason this payoff even happened. Lucy is intrinsically geared towards being romantically involved with Maximus. With everything we know about her, it seems like the natural thing to occur, but this isn't thanks to Maximus's character. It's more so down to how the writers forced them together. Lucy needed convincing that Maximus is good before trusting him for the Radaway. If she doesn't, she dies. Her options are pretty slim. Besides, she already met him in Philly, where she clearly saw his face in the armour. Strangely enough, she seemed endeared towards him there, but not at their second meeting. However, she is right to bring up that Maximus could have deceived her when he was in need of help. That self-awareness should probably carry through to other scenes, rather than reverting her to blindly trusting again. By this scene, she She knows trust doesn't come easily in the wasteland, and yet she still has an almost unequivocal confidence in people after this point, even if the end result could easily not be in her favour. Her naivety still shines through and makes it difficult to like her when there are smarter choices to be made. After being sold to the super duper mart by the ghoul, she's still willing to save his life by giving him vials, even though it's still lucky that he happens to faint just as she's out of his custody. Having to kill Martha the Ghoul would change her outlook, because in that scenario, she understood that she had to kill her. But when on the bridge with Maximus in episode 5, she still opts for the peaceful outcome. One might be a ghoul, and the others are rational people, but she acts like this was something that didn't need to happen. So many encounters at this point have ended in chaos, because that's how the wasteland works. People aren't just going to change if you ask them to. Something I thought she'd come to terms with after having to threaten or shoot a bunch of people, and after the conversation with Maximus. The wasteland is a place of kill or be killed. Her clinging to the idea that there was always a better option should have been depleted drastically by the time of the scene on the bridge. But because we have to save her definite acceptance of the world for the season finale, she's not acting like a real person in the meantime. The only person she can trust is Maximus, and yet she risks their lives in a situation that would be easier if there wasn't so much faith being put into other people.
On the count of 3, we all raise up our arms.
What the fuck are you talking about?
This is 2 scenes after the articulating of her own self-awareness. They even threw in a scene between teaming up with Maximus and the bridge scene just to reiterate the same thing, but all the coming sequence seems to do is halt that progress. If it wasn't for an absurd amount of luck again, one, if not both of them, would be dead. It's a miracle they survived, since Maximus got to the gun later than the other people. Maximus's explanation for why he did it is that they were fiends. But before we can get any introspection from Lucy, or a conversation about what just happened and what it might mean for their characters, she is distracted by the gunshot wound in Maximus's arm. It's as if the writers knew there had to be some consequences for this encounter, and so had Maximus get grazed. The gunshot could have landed anywhere, but never mind. Having this happen then doubles as a way to not have to deal with the fallout of the situation, because otherwise that would ruin her already botched progression. So when Lucy makes her way to the observatory, the logical through line and expectation for what can be expected can be thrown out entirely. Everything we've learned about her up to this point has either been contradictory or poorly executed. But there's no time to think about that, because she's here to deliver Wilzig's head and learn the truth. It turns out that Lucy's mum took her to Shady Sands as a child after she learnt the truth about Hank. So what did Hank do? He bombed Shady Sands and brought Lucy back to the vault and killed his wife. He destroyed an entire city with an atomic bomb, one that he must have kept in Vault 31. The explanation for all of this has to be good, otherwise the whole narrative is about to fall apart. The show clarifies that he went to Shady Sands when they were in a vault quarantine, so nobody would have seen him leave. But that doesn't explain why they wouldn't have realised that Lucy or her mum had left too. They surely escaped prior to the quarantine, because Hank couldn't have put a quarantine in place before learning of them leaving. Besides, none of this answers why Lucy's mum wouldn't have told anybody else the truth about the vaults. It's also convenient she didn't bother to take off her Vault-Tec uniform once at Shady Sands, because that would mean Lucy's memory of the event would be in further jeopardy, and the mystery would be ruined. I assume she would have been there for more than a day, and yet she wears the same clothes, even though the ghoul isn't wearing the Vault uniform. Despite not wanting to associate with the vaults anymore, she never thought about changing, or was never offered any other clothes by Moldava. Anyway, Lucy is convinced that her dad is evil and gets him to give Moldava the codes for the infinite energy source. But then the Brotherhood arrives. There's carnage, there's mayhem, there's the ghoul, Maximus gets smacked into a table, and Lucy has to make a choice. Luckily, the ghoul shows up just before she's forced to do something, and so Hank escapes, meaning Lucy has to make another choice. The moment we are meant to cite for when Lucy's arc is over is once she shoots her mother. But isn't this the right thing to do? Living like that isn't really even living, because she probably doesn't even know who she is, nor does she have any skin, or can speak. Why would this be a hard choice for Lucy, since she already killed Martha 3 episodes ago? This might be her mother. Hang on, is it though? Moldava could have just put a random necklace on a ghoul and lied about it being her mother. She might be the good guy of the series, but as we've been shown, she's not exactly above doing terrible things for her own benefit. The show might believe that everything it's depicting is the truth, but that doesn't mean we should accept it for that reason alone. The evidence is at the very least making it ambiguous as to the true identity of the ghoul, so whatever Moldava says must be taken with a grain of salt. Lucy should be furious at Moldava for what she did. She should barely even consider her side of the story. Besides, how would Shady Sands getting bombed turn Lucy's mother into a ghoul? There might be an answer in the lore, but this series doesn't bother explaining it, which might be frustrating for people who haven't played the games. Maximus wasn't ghoulified despite emerging from a fridge right outside the blast zone. Seeing as Lucy's mum was also far enough away from the blast to survive it, then why does she look like this? And why wasn't she, or Moldava, or anybody else for that matter, able to get some vials to prevent this outcome? The vials may be scarce, but from what we've seen, they're not impossible to come across. If Lucy had asked any of these questions, then her massive end of season payoff would be meaningless and we wouldn't get that final okie dokie, telling all the people that haven't been concentrating that the guise of an arc just happened. Anyway, she's now off with the ghoul, ready for whatever could possibly happen to her in season 2, and I'm sure it'll be just as compelling as this season. That was fun, wasn't it? Everyone's ability to function like real human beings has been mutilated by an increasingly crumbling plot. One that, as soon as any inspections are made, reveals itself as a collection of nonsense scenes strung together by an over-reliance on contrivances, coincidences, and stupidity. I don't know when part 2 will be released, so don't expect anything too soon. That being said, the next video will be focusing on the ghoul. I can't wait to try and break down his interesting combat choices, among many other problems.